Hello everybody, a warm welcome to Wisdom from North, the place where we're diving into the deeper meaning of life and asking the big questions. My name is Jannike, and today we're going to delve into the mystery of the world's most famous figure within world literature, William Shakespeare. And I'm very excited to be sitting next to Petter Amundsen, who is an author and a church organist, and he has truly delved into the Shakespeare material and has discovered and deciphered several secret codes within the Shakespeare material. And this has again given rise to the authorship question. And Petter has also linked Shakespeare's work to the Rosicrucians, to esoteric wisdom, and to even a treasure on Oak Island, and even to the Menorah and the Ark itself. So stay with us. It's going to be a long story, but stay with us and you'll get pretty much the whole story. We'll try. We'll do our best.
Well,
welcome, Petter.
Thank you for having this interview. So I can't say thank you for inviting me because this is my church. This is where I work. So
yes.
Nice to have you here, and I'm so glad to have this conversation.
Yes, it's wonderful being here. It gives this nice atmosphere, I think, to Shakespeare, because it's something, you know, we all have a relationship to. And I'm wondering about, I discovered this story actually through this documentary, 7 Steps to Mercy.
Which was partly filmed in this chapel.
Right.
So it's very fitting.
Yes, and that's, and you guys can see that on Vimeo, right?
Vimeo has the series, but the documentary film is not ready to be sold, but it will be.
Right, great, because it's an awesome documentary. It's just so enticing.
Thank you.
I kind of feel like it seemed like that reality is even more fantastic than the fantasy, if this is true.
Yes, that was my own words, because it is beyond belief, and that makes you a bit hesitant to pursue it, because you know that there will be ridicule. People will think that you are crazy, but I have been thinking, so what? I just do it anyway, and I have not regretted. It has been a fantastic journey so far, and lots of battles, but more fun even.
Yeah. So how did you get into this? I mean, you're a church organist, and you're not a professor, not a scholar, and then you delve into Shakespeare. Like, what sparked this interest in Shakespeare?
It was my study of codes and ciphers. I really needed to learn about the secret writing, and there was a man who had published a book in the 1890s about Shakespeare's gravestone, and he said that on this stone Bacon's famous biliterary cipher had been used. So I needed to replicate what this author had done, and just to familiarize myself with the method. And suddenly I find that I have a new solution on my desk, and I knew that, wow, this can change everything. So I just had to launch this Shakespeare thing before I went on with the other task I was doing that made me want to look into ciphers. But now it has been 14 years, so and I think that there may be, if not 14 more years, but there is unfinished business here.
So were you always curious about the authorship? Let's take that first.
I have certainly not been curious about the authorship. I read about the authorship in a newspaper in a small notice many years ago, and I was thinking that is just crazy. So people want to create dramatic news stories, but I didn't believe that at all. But when I stumbled across this cipher, I really had to rethink it, because what I saw on that piece of paper was real, and I knew that my method of what I had done to arrive to that conclusion was, in my opinion, a valid solution. So that turned everything.
So tell us about what you found, because you have one of those folios of Shakespeare's collection.
Not at that moment.
Okay.
I just had the gravestone cipher, as I call it, because that stone had the original stone. It's not any longer in the church, and that is a mystery too. So some people say, it's not certain that that really was the original stone, but we have 3 different sources documenting that the original stone had a special trait, and that was that you had large and small letters in a very strange mix. So suddenly in the middle of a word you had a capital A where there should have been a lowercase letter. And Bacon's cipher is very close to the digital alphabet that we use in computers, the ASCII alphabet. And it is a 5-bit system that you have 2 variables, and Bacon called them A's and B's. So we have groups of 5 A's and B's, and each of these can be 32 different letters in this case. So on the stone, the A's were the lowercase letters and the B's were the uppercase letters. So you were grouping them 5 and 5, and suddenly you get what is missing, because on this stone you do not have the name of Shakespeare. It's just a poem. It doesn't say Shakespeare at all. But suddenly the letters of Shakespeare appear from this cipher. And what I also noticed is that you can have Francis Bacon's name as well. And he invented this cipher method that makes this reveal itself. So I found that to be extraordinary. And then I got a copy of the folio that you mentioned, the famous first folio, because there were 4 folios, and this is the first of those 4, and it was published in 1623, so almost 400 years ago.
Is it 400 years old, this folio?
Almost, but this is a facsimile. So,
okay.
But
okay.
I am a collector as well, so I have 16 pages of original first folio. And that is a good thing to have, because from a collector's perspective, it is just the Gutenberg Bible that is more interesting. You have Gutenberg Bible, and then you have the first folio of Shakespeare. So a complete, perfect specimen of the first folio from 1623 would fetch about £5 million or so on the auction market.
Wow.
If it had been perfect.
But I didn't think that there was any original material from Shakespeare.
Not any handwritten, no manuscripts.
Oh, okay.
So manuscripts
okay.
that is manual, is no handwriting.
Okay.
But you have printed books.
Okay.
So everything we have from Shakespeare is in books, and just a few signatures, and these signatures have been debated back and forth, and some people see that they are a smoking gun, that the man called William Shakespeare, he couldn't even write his own name, and other people take these signatures and compare it with a few pages of Sir Thomas More, a manuscript, and they say that, oh, you can see that this must be Shakespeare because you can compare the signature with the handwriting. So people see what they want to see. But to me, the solution on the gravestone was so definite that in my mind, I knew that Francis Bacon had something to do, but not necessarily to conclude that he was the author, but that he was connected to Shakespeare somehow. And of course, the Francis Bacon method that had not yet been published when this stone was put into the ground, because Shakespeare died in 1616, and this method was published at the same time that the book was published, the folio, in 1623. So we have 7 years. So somebody knew the cipher method 7 years before it had been published. And that tells you something, that it is probably worthwhile pursuing that line of thought that Francis Bacon could have something to do with it. And then I got the facsimile version from Amazon that did not cost £5 million.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Francis Bacon and this Shakespeare that apparently many thinks are just a straw man.
I think he was a straw man. I think that that Shakespeare, and this may sound pedantic that I'm talking about Shakespeare and Shakespeare, but just to separate between the poet
person and the so-called worldwide famous Shakespeare.
And on the first books we even had Shake-Spear, so that is really a spear shaker, and it's normal to think that it was an image for Pallas Athena, and she was the goddess of knowledge, and Francis Bacon called her his muse, so she's called the 10th muse. So that is the shearspeaker, and she had a golden helmet, and Wilhelm is really Gwilhelm, golden helmet from Germany. So William Shakespeare is really a perfect name for someone who adores Pallas Athena. Yeah. But were they connected, Bacon and Shakespeare? This we do not know.
They knew each other, you mean?
We have no trace of any correspondence between them. Of course, we do not have any correspondence from William Shakespeare at all. Nothing in writing. We only have these signatures that may or may not be from his own hand, because sometimes scriveners would write the name.
So it seems like he was not literate at all, and that his children even couldn't read and write or write.
That's very true, because we have this line of persons. So if we take the parents of Shakespeare, when they had the opportunity to demonstrate skill in writing, they didn't show us that they could write. We have just an X for John Shakespeare, for instance. And he had 3 children, 1 son who died, and these 2 daughters. Judith, when she should sign her name, she did like this, like a pigtail. She didn't write her name. And Susanna, who married John Hall, so she once signed Susanna Hall, but it may not have been her hand, because a book collector or a physician, he went to Susanna Hall when she had become a widow, because he wanted to buy the notebooks from her husband, who was a physician. And when Susanna came with the books, she couldn't read them. So he said that, oh, okay, here is your husband's writing. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. Oh, I can't read it. So.
And this we know.
This we know, yeah. In the sense that we know something about history, right. But this is at least a source. And in between 2 parents who were probably illiterate and 2 daughters probably illiterate, we have the world's greatest poet and the man who almost single-handedly created the modern English language.
Was Shakespeare connected to the theatre?
Shakespeare was an actor. So
was an actor. Okay.
I think that it is not just Francis Bacon who wrote the works. I think that he was part of a group. I'm a groupist. So to me, there are three real authors. There may be more, but I have seen cryptographical evidence that these 3 guys were part of it. And that is, of course, Sir Francis Bacon and Sir Henry Neville. He was Bacon's nephew by marriage. And we have Sir William Stanley. He was the Earl of Derby. And the Earl of Derby, he was very interested in the theatre. And his brother had his own company of players, and Shakespeare was part of this. Almost certainly, because when Shakespeare appeared as an actor in the Lord Chamberlain's Men, the Lord Chamberlain's Men emerged from Lord Strang's men, and Lord Strang was the brother of William Stanley. And William Stanley inherited the rest of the players, those who didn't enter the Lord Chamberlain's Men. They became Darby's men. So he had his own company of players. And there is this Jesuit spy who writes about William Stanley, that he was spending all his time writing comedies for the common players. And we do not have anything in writing of poetry or plays from William Stanley. So perhaps he channeled all his poetry into the Shakespeare project. So here we have a possible link that in the so-called lost years, because from 1585 until 1592, when Shakespeare emerges on the London stage, we don't know what he was doing, so they call this the lost years. Then, if he was part of a theatre group, then it most probably would be Lord Strang's Men. And then Darby and Shakespeare could have all the time they needed to really plan this, that when you come to London, you will front our place. We need to have someone who can be a facade, because we are three gentlemen, and gentlemen, as you know, do not publish plays, and some of them may be a little bit touchy, so the Queen may take offense. So you do this and we will reward you properly.
And most of the plays were published after Shakespeare's death, right? Also.
That is true, or at least half of them in this first folio. So if we hadn't had this first folio, we would have lost so much of what is really our culture. So this is why this book is almost like the Bible.
So let's talk about what the purpose is for these maybe three writers to hide behind this Shakespeare. It seems to be a greater cause. And you have also talked a lot about the Rosicrucians, that these men were linked to Shakespeare. Like, do you think that these men, like Neville, Bacon, and Stanley,
yep,
they were Rosicrucians?
I think so, yes, I do. Okay. But this is a late development, so we have to go back to the 1590s. I do not think that at that time they had the Rosicrucian ideas. I think what they wanted was to lift English culture and awareness and language in the same way that the Pléiades had done in France. I think that this was an idea that was fostered by Sir Francis Bacon, because when he was a young person, he went to France for a few years, and he befriended a poet called Ronsard, who was the head of the group called the Pléiades, which is, of course, a constellation, but also
a star constellation.
Yes, and there are these seven, the group of the seven Pleiades, and they are goddesses representing different aspects of culture. So they said that we need to do something for the French language, so we will write new poetry, new drama in French, and we will translate the classics into French. And Sir Francis, he was not Sir at that time, but young Francis, he thinks, we need this for England. So he goes back and...
This is your theory, or is this...
This is not something that I have created. This is a general idea among people who are heretics like I am.
Okay, right.
Yeah, so, but the idea is that he goes to France, gets a brilliant idea, returns to England, and does the same thing there. And he allies with Neville and Stanley, and they write wonderful drama and poems. Who does exactly what is a mystery, of course. Some people will say that the Venus and Adonis maybe Francis Bacon because of Hall and Marston, two writers who, in a very clever way, they say that Sir Francis may have written Venus and Adonis. So maybe that was Sir Francis, and maybe Romeo and Juliet is Henry Neville. Who knows? But these three guys, I think that it began like this. But in 1603, something happens. Elizabeth dies, and King James is ascending the throne. And I think that things changed at that point. He brought with him the Masonic tradition from Scotland, Freemasons, because we generally think that Masonry is a Scottish thing. It may have been an English thing as well, but normally we think of this as a Scottish Masonry, and King James was said to be the highest officer in the Scottish Lodge. Of course, this is debated. This is not a sure thing. Some people will say not at all, that is just pure fantasy, but some will say this, some will say that. But from 1603, we see that Francis Bacon gets a new idea, something he calls the Great Instauration. And that is, he's taking this Shakespeare project and he gives it an extra spin. He wants to really educate. So he creates new philosophy, and it ends up with what has become the scientific method. In his Novum Organum, he writes about the hypothetical deductive method that is the foundation of science. For instance, so many things. But I think Shakespeare is part of this great instauration. But if you look at the word itself, instauration, in Bible translations, it means to create a new temple. So I think, and this is me speculating, now, that King James knew about certain artifacts that he had inherited in the masonry from the Templars. So if we go
the Knight Templars?
The Knight Templars, because this is also a tradition that fleeing Templars went to Scotland, and British Templars, they got a few months of extra time when we hear about the year 1307 and King Philip in France. He attacks the Knights Templar on Friday the 13th. But in England, it didn't happen like that. It didn't happen until January the year after. So the Templars in England, they had some time to prepare and go away. So it is believed that many went to Scotland. And of course, if the Templars had secrets, they would bring them along to Scotland. And it is believed that Templarism evolved into Freemasonry. At least that is part of modern Freemasonry, that Templars have amalgamated into Freemasonry, that it is the modern version of Templarism.
And also that they brought treasures from Jerusalem to Europe.
Yes,
earlier.
So if we can put Shakespeare on pause, we jump back in time. In the year 70 AD, Titus, who was the son of the emperor, he went to Jerusalem in order to make peace. And he made peace, but in a very brutal and violent way. And it ended with the temple being burnt, and everything in it was looted and brought to Rome. So we read about the Menorah and the showing bread table and the silver trumpets being paraded through the streets of Rome in the year 71 AD. And the father of Titus says, we will celebrate the new peace in Rome by creating this wonderful new museum, a temple of peace, the Templum Pacis in Latin. And the cornerstone of this new museum shall be the Jewish vessels from the temple. And these vessels remained there for several hundred years, until 433, if I remember correctly, when the Vandals attacked Rome, and then they brought these vessels to Carthago, and the Vandals kept them there for not for 100 years, but into the 500s, and they were really brutal. They behaved like ISIS. They even worse towards the Christians in the area, and then people from Constantinople said that this can't go on, so we have to interfere, and then sent the general Belisarius to Carthago, and he fixed the problem and took the Jewish vessels, the Menorah, etc., and brought these to Constantinople, which of course is Istanbul today. And this is the last we see of them, because we learn that
the last we see of the Menorah?
The Menorah and the showing bread table and the silver trumpets. The showing bread table was really the most sacred object. So we think about the Menorah, of course, because that is on the coat of arms of Israel. But since they did not have an ark, then the showing bread table was the closest they could get to God. Oh. So that was the more sacred object of them. But today we think about the Menorah and of course the ark, but that is a separate part of this. But there was this Christian man who told the empress in Constantinople that these objects have only meant bad luck for those who had them. Look at Rome. Rome was ruined because of these vessels. Look at Carthago. It was attacked and crushed because of this. And now you have them. Will you keep them? No, maybe we should do something else. She says, okay, and then he suggested then return them to Jerusalem.
Oh, okay.
And I believe that they really did this, but we do not know where to. Some people say that the only place that would be sacred enough for these vessels would be the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which was in operation at that time, very old church. But there is no sign of it there. I was thinking it would be a much better place to return it to the temple, because these are temple vessels, should be returned to the temple. But of course the temple was ruined in the year 70, so there was no building, but there were cellars. So there are lots of corridors and tunnels in the Temple Mount.
And now today there's a mosque there, right?
There are two mosques. You have the Al-Aqsa, which is on the southern part, and you have the Dome of the Rock on top of where the Ark of the Covenant used to be, which is the holy peak where the most sacred part of the whole world, if you like. But I think that they found a place for it near the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And the reason I say this is because we know that the Templars, when they began their operations in Jerusalem, they did not protect pilgrims in the way that we normally hear that, oh, we had this fantastic new order that would protect the pilgrims on their passage to the Holy Sepulchre Church. They did not. They were even reprimanded for not protecting the king and not protecting the pilgrims. They were digging and they were building. And we know that they had their headquarters in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They went to the king and said, please can we have this wing of the royal palace which was the Al-Aqsa Mosque, now the Royal Palace. And they said, yes, please, and I will move my things away so you can do whatever you like. And archaeologists have found Templar remains in this area. So they were doing something here. But the smoking gun is not that. What is fantastic is that a few years ago, a few pictures emerged from the cellars of a library in the United States, taken by an American archaeologist who had been asked to participate in a Muslim project in the Al-Aqsa Mosque because there were something that had collapsed and they needed to handle this properly. And he could participate and he could also take pictures, but he was forbidden to publish any picture that would be regarded problematic. And problematic, that would be any signs of Christian activity or Jewish activity in that part, because it's very tense in Jerusalem. So if suddenly something appears that proves that the Jews really had a claim for that property, then it could blow up. So we have the Al-Aqsa Mosque where the Templars have been digging. But we do not have any indication that this was indeed the place where the menorah and the showing bread table, etc., would be stored. But one of the pictures taken by this archaeologist shows Byzantine mosaic found down into the cellars of the Al-Aqsa Mosque from that very time period when the people from Constantinople would be there. So that is a definite proof that there was contact. We know that people from Constantinople had been there. There is no question about it. Of course, if this means that this was the place where they had brought the menorah, that is still open for speculation, but it is very likely. And if that was the case, then the Templars would have to have found it. When they were tunneling down, of course, the first thing they will find is the menorah and these other relics. And so I suspect that they brought them to Europe and found suitable places for them in the new cathedrals that they were erecting in Europe at the time. And when the Templars were fleeing in the early 14th century, they brought these objects with them. So,
where do you think they're now? Like, okay, so we're going to get to Oak Island.
Yes, but we need to prepare the passage. Yeah.
Do you think perhaps that they were brought to Oak Island after that?
Not directly.
Not directly.
I don't think that the Templars took their boats and went across the Atlantic. I don't think that.
No, but first to Europe, but then they might be now in Oak Island.
My best guess so far is that they brought them to an island called Lundy.
Okay.
Lundy, named from the lundefugl that we have in Norway.
Okay.
Yeah. Because this was an island in the Irish Sea that the Templars owned. And that would be on the way that could have been their way to England if they were indeed fleeing. If there is any truth in the story that we hear that several ships were leaving La Rochelle and bringing along treasures, this is the testimony of one Templar. He said that they went to La Rochelle and sailed away with everything.
Is that written down?
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's just one testimony.
Okay.
And of course we grasp that for
that's all we have.
Yeah.
And the legend.
Yes, but we have we connect dots, but there is a definite dot that I will present shortly. So I think Lundy may have been a storage facility, or maybe the Isle of Wight, but some island near England. And I think the knowledge was kept alive. And when King James eventually became king of both Scotland and England, then they may have thought, okay, now is the time. We have this new continent. We have America, the new Atlantis, as Francis Bacon called it. That is a new land of milk and honey. What better place to build a new temple for our treasures that we have to take care of in the best way possible? This is not something that you are not careless. Of course, crossing the Atlantic, that is a risk. But maybe you think that, okay, with these holy vessels, then the ship cannot founder and sink. That's impossible. So maybe they felt safe. I think that they built a new storage facility in America, and specifically in Nova Scotia. And the reason why they did this was because it would be a perfect place if you look at the sky and you see the Christian cross in the sky called the Northern Cross, which is part of the Swan, the Cygnus.
The star constellation, the Swan?
Yes,
okay.
But the Swan is rather large with the tips of the wings, but you have the central part of the Cygnus, the Swan, is called the Northern Cross. So it's just a cross, and some people have seen it as a prophecy for Christianity.
Okay.
And it is also a possible explanation of what Constantine saw, because he said in hoc signo vincis, by this sign you will conquer. And there's this interesting possibility with the two birds in the sky. You have the eagle, which is the Roman, the other Roman emperor, and you have the cross being the swan. And every morning the swan will overtake the eagle, because the eagle will dip down into the west before the swan does. So the cross stays. And some say that since Maxentius, the enemy of Constantine, he had the eagle as his badge, then the cross would be victorious. So this is an explanation why the cross became popular, because before this the cross was not looked upon as a good sign. It was a torture instrument. So the Christians, they used the fish, for instance, instead as a symbol. So after Constantine we have the cross. So this would be very
let's get back to Oak Island.
Yes.
And why they perhaps picked that place in relation to the star constellation, because I find that so interesting. Why would that matter?
Yeah, because the star at the top of the cross, that would unite the cross with the square and compasses in the sky. And when I say this, of course, this needs an explanation. But if you look into the Shakespeare ciphers that I really believe to have discovered, then you will see that the Old Covenant is symbolized by the square and compasses in the sky, and you have the 7 steps going from the peak of the square to the top of the compass, which is 7 steps.
That's why the documentary is called the Seven
Steps to Mercy. Yes. And that point is astronomically the top of the Northern Cross in the sky. And if you think, okay, that would be a fantastic place to build a new temple for these sacred objects. But what do you do? Because the sky is the sky and the earth is the earth. And of course we have this old adage, as above, so below. But there is a way to take a point above and to fix it below. And this has to do with the grids of longitude and latitude. We divide the Earth into 360 degrees both ways, and we do the same with the sky. So even if the sky is not a globe like the Earth is, no, it's a flat Earth. then we symbolize it the same way because of the grid system. So we have the Earth globe and the celestial globe.
You showed that in the documentary. That was very visual and great to see.
Yes.
It's hard for you guys, but yeah.
But two balls.
Two balls, one terrestrial and one
And you
sky.
have 360 degrees both ways on both of these, and you have to decide where is the zero meridian, because you need to have a zero. And for the longitude, that is easy because you have the equator, where is the world the fattest. If you compare the poles where it spins, okay, here is the zero. But the other way, it's not that obvious, so you have to decide. And there have been several different zero meridians, and today we have the international, the GMT meridian in Greenwich in London. But in the earlier days, we had the Ptolemean meridian, which was the westernmost of the Canary Islands, because they only had longitude east. So they had to select the westernmost point they knew of, which was the Canary Islands. So they calculated everything from there. So anything beyond west of the Canaries, that was terra incognita. But when you use this meridian as your system, and then you see, okay, where would Deneb, as it is called, the top of the Northern Cross, that star, where would that be if we take the same north and west and put it onto the globe? And then you will find that it is very close to Nova Scotia. It is almost at the border between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia today. And the stars move a little bit up and down through a cycle of 25,000 years.
Okay.
And in 1790, the latitude of Deneb and Oak Island was exact.
1790?
1790. And if you think about synchronicity, in those years, in that decade, the treasure hunt on Oak Island began.
Right, I just saw a documentary because a History Channel has a documentary about the Oak Island now, and I started watching it. And I saw that around that time they started looking for things, and there were even some lights in the sky that has been observed there. I just have to mention it.
There are lots of stories on Oak Island.
Yeah.
But synchronicity is fantastic. But I have my guys going further back in time, in the 1620s, because I think that was when the works were undertaken on the island. But they were...
I have to connect this a little bit to Egypt, because as we know, like the pyramids are also built in relation to the stars. Do you have any thoughts about why it was important?
The old word templum, that is now the temple, did not necessarily mean the building. The templum was something that the soothsayers, the augurs, the wise men were constructing on the ground, geometry. And what they did was to connect the sky with the earth. And they used stars. So I think that this is something that they had from Egypt. So this is older in Egypt, and some people say that the pyramids are like the belt of Orion, and some say that no, it's Cygnus actually. So there is a debate which constellation is the master shape here. But I think that the idea is to connect heaven and earth. And then they build the edifice on top of the templum. So this is also why I think that there is no building on Oak Island, that they only have the pyramids, if you like, the large boulders that are put in the shape of a giant cross. You have 5, 10-ton or even heavier boulders in the terrain. Boulders, large stones.
Right.
So they would be almost like the pyramids if you say that the pyramids match the constellation.
Right.
Then you have these boulders. They are not an exact replica of the cross in the sky, but they mimic it. But what they are is a perfect cross with exact 90-degree angles, and the length of the arms are 360 feet, a very geometric number, 360. So that is something that only works in feet, the imperial feet. So that is why I say that those who built this would know the English measurements. So don't think that the Templars would do that, because fleeing Templars from La Rochelle, French, in the
So it wasn't even them.
in the early 1300s. I think that the Nolan's cross, as it is called, this large cross on the terrain, in the terrain, it was built at a later stage.
Okay.
By Rosicrucians.
By Rosicrucians. Okay.
Yes, because this cross has a very special feature. It is the cross, but because there is no stone at the junction where the arms and the stem meet, but there is a huge boulder down the stem, that makes it possible to say, wow, those 5 boulders making that cross is half of a tree of life, which is a Kabbalistic symbol. And the Christian Kabbalah, that is Rosicrucianism. They said that we are Kabbalists. And to create a cross that works as a cross and also as a tree of life is very brilliant. And then you can try to calculate where would those invisible 5 Sephiroth, as they are called, these points in the tree of life, they call the Sephiroth, where would they be in the terrain?
And just so people understand, like you have found this out in the text of Shakespeare, in the material, you found out that there could be this tree of life on Oak Island, right? And then you went there and you excavated 2 of these boulders.
It would be very neat if that was how it happened, but it was not in that sequence.
Okay.
No, because I watched a film about Oak Island, and I saw that cross that Mr. Nolan discovered, and it was presented, and I immediately thought, oh, that could be a tree of life, but I didn't do anything about it. And then I heard about the idea that Shakespeare's manuscripts would be stored on Oak Island because they had found mercury on Oak Island, and maybe Sir Francis Bacon's method for preservation had been used on Oak Island. So this is not something that I have,
Okay.
No. But later on, when I was learning about the cipher and using the gravestone, as we discussed, then I saw that wow, this does indeed look like a Rosicrucian cipher, because there were certain numbers that were present, like 53 and 106,
yes,
and 37, which leads directly into this. And then I remembered, wow, we have this island with this possible Kabbalistic tree of life, and some people say that Shakespeare's manuscript could be buried there, and now we have Rosicrucian ciphers that I have found that is present in Shakespeare, and also found other Rosicrucian signatures in the big folio. So the gravestone was just the beginning, but I had
you connected it all together.
But then it was to try to machine it, going back to say, if they had been planting a way to find Oak Island in Shakespeare, what could they have been doing? And then I was looking for things that could indicate the island, and I didn't find anything on Oak Island, but I found a very interesting cipher that indicated something called Gloucester Island. But Gloucester Island was the old name for Oak Island. On the first maps you see Oak Island called Gloucester Island. Of course that can be cherry picking, because I know what I am looking for. But then the sonnets appear, the sequence of 154 poems that Shakespeare wrote. And there is a dedication there, and it has a very obvious acrostic TT map, and then you have two constellations, Botus and Wain.
Can you explain what acrostic is for those who don't know?
Acrostic is that you take the outermost letter of a line, and then you read from the top down or the other way up. It's very simple.
And then you found TT map.
Yeah.
And that's...
So TT
could
be anything, but map is pretty definite, and especially, well, that is just 3 letters, so it could be a coincidence. But when map immediately is followed by Botus and Wain.
Wait, you found the connection between TT map and Botus and Wain.
And Wain. And Botus is a constellation that is very close to the Wain. The Wain is Charles Wain or Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, Karlsvognen, as we say in Norwegian. And Botus is the next to constellation. And wow, we have a map here. And then we have Rosicrucian signatures in a poem in the first folio by Ben Jonson, who was a colleague of Shakespeare, a poet. And he talks about the chimera of the Rosicrucian. And the chimera is a fable creature which has a lion's head and a goat's body and a dragon's tail. And wow, but these are constellations too. So, and in the same poem we have Ben Jonson saying, "Sweet Swan of Avon," about Shakespeare calling him that, which is a legendary name for Shakespeare. And he says that, "But stay, I see thee in the hemisphere advanced, and may the constellation there shine forth, thou star of poets." So he's talking about...
Is this in the sonnet? Or?
No, that is in the same poem by Ben Jonson, where he uses the Rosicrucian signature. So he says that the constellation, the Swan, is linked to Shakespeare. And then you have the chimera of the Rosicrucian. And the Swan and the lion's head, the dragon's tail, the goat, and the Botus and the Wain, together they construct a wonderful square and compass in the sky, which has those 7 steps going from the lion's head up to the Decoded star of the Swan. And geometrical, it is the sides of it is perfect. The distance from the middle of the Wain out to Capella, the goat, and out to Botus, it is exact. And also the 90 degrees up to the end. Of course, the head of the line is not that exact. You hit the head, but the star that is part of the head is Regulus, the small king. It is a little bit off, but hey, you can't demand perfection. This is nature. But Deneb and Arcturus in Botus and Capella and the middle of the Wain, that is a perfect 3x4 triangle. And the 3-4-5 triangle is something that apparently was a sacred symbol to the Rosicrucians.
Okay.
So it all clicks. So that is my contribution to this. I have found definite Rosicrucian signatures in Shakespeare, and I have found this Rosicrucian map that works through the stars, because you don't have anything that connects the island with Europe until I come along. So I have not invented that the Shakespeare manuscripts should be on Oak Island. I have certainly not invented that Bacon wrote Shakespeare or anything like that, but my contribution has been the stellar map and the Rosicrucian signatures in Shakespeare. And that will also help explain the nature of the treasure, because the Rosicrucians, they they make it possible to look for certain objects linked to the temple.